Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining Regence and our entire team again for what is now the fifth in our ongoing webinar series as we've all navigated COVID-19 together. Today's topic, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we have a lot to do in a very short amount of time. But one of the topics we heard from all of you that we know is important is starting to think a little bit longer term around preparing our businesses and preparedness for business in a COVID environment and beyond. And we have both Dr. Amy Kahn, our Executive Medical Director, who's been a part of this from day one as we've navigated COVID-19 together, as one of our guests. But we also have Kelly Okolita, who is one of the most prominent disaster planning and recovery experts in the country, who is our Director of Emergency Preparedness, to share some insights with you about how you can use and implement some of these best practices in your business. First, flipping over into our first slide. You've seen this slide from the very beginning. This is our North Star, our compass of how we've thought about trying to help you and our own organization through these interesting times, about members, employers, providers, the communities we support as an Idaho Blue. We take that responsibility very seriously, and we continue to evolve through the situation, offering our members, customers, broker partners, and community partners a whole host of resources in this unique time. There's two specifically I actually want to call out and bring some attention to. First is My Strength. One of the interesting elements of this COVID experience for the state and for the nation has been is access to behavioral health resources. And we are offering all of our members through the end of the year free access to COVID-19 specific resources on the My Strength app. If you look in the chat feature here in Zoom, you'll see a link to that information. But again, for all of our members across Regence, members have access to this behavioral health technology and app at their fingertips. And we're making that free through the end of the year to support people, both existing behavioral health issues, but also isolation and loneliness during COVID-19. We think it's a really important part of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've seen it in our own telehealth access and resources. People really diving in and double-clicking on using telehealth for behavioral health support. The second, free of charge for all Regence customers through the end of the year, is COVID-19 resources for Empower, which is our wellness platform for Regence customers. Includes self-guided programs on managing stress, building resilience, good nutrition. Again, all things that we are trying to do to provide these resources to our members to support them on their journey through these challenging and interesting times. So we want to make that easy to get to. We want to be able to bring down the hurdles to accessing those by making them free to our members. And at the end, I'll show you some other tools and resources that we've deployed for all Regence customers. But if you ever have any questions about what we're doing or what's available to you as employers or as producers in the marketplace, you can always call our award-winning customer service line, and all of our customer service reps have access to all of the resources and free tools that we're making available to customers throughout our company's footprint. The road ahead, I've gotten a lot of questions from both professional colleagues and personal contacts being in the business about what the road ahead looks like as an insurer, as the healthcare system, but also importantly to business in the state of Idaho. We've taken the position that we're a resource to help you navigate through this. We're not just here as an insurer, we're part of your community, we're your neighbors, we're your friends. We have 650 people throughout the entire state of Idaho who are here to support you. And we're just as much in this pandemic as you are, but we have a special role to play serving as a resource, a guide, a navigator. And so part of that responsibility is trying to see where the puck is going, so to speak. Not skating to the puck where it is today, but skating to where the puck is headed. And, you know, everybody's crystal balls have been foggy the last few months in particular. So, you know, we want to be that resource to you to help you through it. But particularly here in the state of Idaho, in the last couple of weeks alone, we've seen an enormous surge in the positive testing rate for COVID-19. In fact, as Dr. Kahn will point to later, that surge exceeds the initial surge we saw in April. This isn't necessarily a second wave, it's a surge potentially of this first wave. And as the state began to reopen, that surge accelerated. And as a result, the governor has continued to hold the state in stage 4, but also supported and empowered local health districts to make decisions that make sense for them based on conditions and data on the ground. And so you've likely seen and experienced various municipalities throughout the state enforcing or even pulling back into stage 3 and enforcing mask requirements, implementing mask requirements, for example, in the city of Boise. So there's a lot of moving parts right now. There was a bit of a lull and things have gotten more dynamic again. And so this webinar, our goal was to share with you both the current situation with Dr. Kahn and what we're seeing to help educate you, but also then as businesses to think through, how do I begin to think about and implement disaster preparedness for future pandemics, future evolutions of this pandemic, or quite frankly, even more generally, making sure our businesses are always prepared so that what happened in March in getting businesses to operate in remote settings is something that you're ready for in the future. So Dr. Kahn will share a clinical update to help your business in this environment. Kelly Okolita, like I said, will walk us through the business methodology of continuity planning. And then I'm going to moderate a discussion between Amy and Kelly, featuring some of your questions and your engagement to make this meaningful to you. And then we'll wrap up with a case study using our own company to share with you about how we've gone through this preparedness and business continuity planning in the hopes that we can harvest some best practices to share with you and answer any of your questions. Before we do that, we're going to take a quick poll. If you could slide up, there it is. If you wouldn't mind just taking a second here and answering this one question: has your organization returned to on-site work? Partially, fully, not yet, or we've never stopped? We'd really like to get this data to help contextualize this conversation. So I'll just pause a moment and ask that you give us your responses. And there on the screen, you should be seeing the results here. I'm seeing live with you for the first time. Partially 30%, fully about the same, 27%, about a fifth of you not back, and about another fourth having never stopped working on site. So really interesting mixture of folks on the phone today, all at various different stages of how they're engaging, getting the organizations into some sort of kind of regular cadence, if you will. So let's start with Dr. Kahn, Dr. Amy Kahn, our Executive Medical Director for Idaho. For those of you who've been with us through the entire series, Dr. Kahn should be a familiar face to you. But for those of you who don't know, Amy isn't just a medical doctor, she is importantly an epidemiologist. And if you spend any time on social media, it feels like everybody is an epidemiologist these days, and they're full of all sorts of opinions, and whether they're based on fact and data is not always clear. But I can tell you Dr. Kahn is an epidemiologist and is full of data. And that's exactly what we try to do here as we steer ourselves and you as our customers through this, is build it off data, information, and facts to make informed decisions. So with that, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Amy Kahn back, and I will turn the mic over to you, Dr. Kahn. Thanks for being with us.
Great, thank you, Sean. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate you all being here. We appreciate your business, your support of our communities, and support of your employees and their families as well. We hope everyone is well today as we're living through, obviously, history. It's been now over 6 months since this new virus landed on our planet, if you will, and we've seen it travel the globe. Putting it in perspective, we now have 3 million cases in the U.S., bringing it a little bit closer to home. Just reported this morning over 8,500 cases now reported in Idaho. And as you can see, we've had some interesting dynamics in terms of the spread of this virus, in terms of confirmed cases across the state, since our governor announced this as an emergency back in March. I think it's important just to kind of set the stage about the importance of public health right now in successfully returning to work or continuing to support each other, not only in the workplace, but at home and in the fall as we anticipate going back to school, right, for our kids and our teachers. So public health really is truly what we do collectively to really assure the conditions in which we all can be healthy. And I think it's important for us to be thinking about these public health measures that you've all heard about as what is in our primary armamentarium right now to defend against this virus. We know there are exciting treatments on the horizon, hopefully a vaccine coming in the next year or so, but we've got a ways to go before we get there. And so it's important to understand public health's role. What you see in this exhibit is an epidemic curve. It's called an epi curve, and this data are provided by our Department of Health and Welfare, the Division of Public Health. And what this shows you across that x-axis or the horizontal axis is the date of onset of clinical symptoms, and then on the y-axis is the number of cases. And I think you can really just quickly see that we did see that early spike in March. Our governor put in place a stay-at-home order. You can see the cases really decreased significantly from on average maybe about 75 a day down to half as much. And then we gradually embarked on our Reopen Idaho plan, stage 1, 2, 3, throughout the month of May. And now we can see, of course, the number of cases have really spiked up. And I believe that this is really about us getting back to the business of our lives, getting out and about, engaging in the things that we like to do. But it's important to understand that public health surveillance, as illustrated in this plot, is that ongoing systematic collection of health data that ultimately inform our actions. So I would hearken back to a comment Sean made that whereas the governor has continued to keep our state open at this stage 4, we know in local and regional areas that some of these communities have had to scale that back in order to protect the citizenry, in order to avoid overwhelming our healthcare system and protect the lives of the most vulnerable, many of whom you employ, many who perhaps never stopped working. And we recognize the risk that that means for you and your business as well as these individuals. So I want to move on to the next slide and just review with you something we covered a few webinars ago, but it's really important to embrace what we do know about this novel virus, how it does its business, and what are the measures that we can take to prevent the transmission. So just to recap, we know that this virus, again, we had no immunity to until this arrived in our world, really has the ability to set up infection with an average incubation of about 4 to 5 days, keeping in mind that roughly 4 out of 5 people may have very mild symptoms. People can even be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, and during that period of time, a person can be shedding virus, which is why it's so important for us to think about the interventions like wearing face coverings or staying physically distant, particularly among those who may be incubating, may be about to have symptoms, but are infectious. We also know that since none of us are immune, this particular virus has a reproduction rate, if you will, or transmissibility, so that one infected person could potentially infect 3 to 4 others. But by putting in place some of these mitigation behaviors, we can reduce the likelihood of that transmission or that R number, reproduction number, within the community. Now, how does this virus do its business? Well, it's by being in close proximity to another infected person, in which that person who's infected would be dispersing respiratory droplets of varying size that are infected that we then get into our own bodies, usually through inhaling it, if you will, or by touching a contaminated surface that might have this virus and then touching our eyes, nose, or face. So again, just a recap of what we know today, how it does its business, and how we might mitigate against getting infected. So it's important also for me to mention that we're not all at the same risk. We know that persons who are older, 60, 65 years of age, are much more likely to have more serious disease, and also people who have chronic illness, diabetes, emphysema, people undergoing cancer treatment, obese persons may be more likely to have that more severe illness requiring hospitalization or perhaps even ventilation in the intensive care unit. Other populations to be thinking about, particularly in our state, are our Native American community members, African American, Hispanic persons. These are individuals that have 4 to 5 times higher likelihood of severe illness and then related hospitalization. So as we think about those in your workforce who are most vulnerable, taking some attention and making sure that we have addressed or accommodated individuals' needs so that they can stay safe and healthy. Let's move on to that next slide, though. I want to recap for you some of the key characteristics or environmental factors that we know come into play as we consider your business environment. And I recognize that some of you will work with the public. You're right there out in front. You're in restaurant, grocery, other kinds of business exchange where you have customers coming into your shop. Others might be in manufacturing or meat packing or more in an office-based setting. But each of these dimensions will be something you want to think about as you adapt your business for success. Again, this is really keeping in mind that we're driving toward recovering our lives and our livelihood through a chapter in this period of history that's probably going to be going on for a few years, right? That really means that we need to change how we behave, and that needs to become part of our own DNA. So quickly, in terms of these dimensions, I want you to be thinking about the movement of individuals. What's the flow of the workforce or patrons that may be coming to your business? Is it directional, all in one way, so that people are not randomly mixing or mingling together? And what is the duration potentially of exposure between individuals? And what is that like? Is it outdoors? Is it indoors in a closed space? All of that has some impact. Assess your work environment based on, is the situation a low risk or is it a high risk? And how close are people? Can we safely keep people distanced at least 6 feet apart? And if not, what's the likelihood that we can erect barriers or have people, be using face masks in the work that they're doing? Group size still matters. It's important for us to keep in mind reducing the volume so that we limit the density of persons intermingling or together at any one time. And then what's the level of respiratory output? Are we quietly working at a desk, or is someone talking or shouting or singing or exercising with others and next to them such that their respiratory output might be greater? We know that shared surfaces could represent an issue, particularly around transmission if someone touched a contaminated surface. But think about things like desks or menus or the exchange of a credit card, right? Maybe we need to be thinking about ways to exchange the business without having to touch something the other person has already touched. And then lastly, thinking about congestion. How can we avoid long queues where people are standing close together? Maybe there's that opportunity to adapt curbside service or delivery in some cases. So again, this encompasses these dimensions for you to consider. Again, actions you might take to limit or reduce the situational characteristics from a higher risk to a lower risk. And this last slide is really to sort of depict an example of a hair salon in which we might think about how can we limit or reduce or lower the risk of viral transmission in a setting where we can successfully reopen that business keep our employees healthy and safe, and keep our patrons safe as well. So many of you may have applied this framework already, but it's never too late to start. I suspect a few of you have already iterated on this process. If you've already opened or stayed open, maybe you're changing your HVAC or filtration system. Maybe you're erecting barriers, if you will. And in the example in this photo, as I looked at the picture, I thought, well, maybe we could ask the patron to wear a mask. That would be another step to further lower the risk. It's likely that this hair salon has now moved the stations more than 6 feet apart. Maybe it's every other chair is being occupied. You could stagger the hours, right? Extend the hours so only a few people are working at any given time to limit that congestion. And then perhaps meeting your client at the door to escort them into the building, into your chair, so that we're really limiting that interface among those who might be getting their services. So this is, again, to provide you some food for thought and some additional ideas as you continue to think through, how are we going to continue to be successful? How are you going to continue to adapt your business towards success through COVID and through any other future assault or impact or other issue that might arise? I suspect many of your businesses have even thought about adapting what you might be providing, whether it be services or products, and thinking about your supply chain in that process as well. So I am going to pause, Sean, and certainly give a moment to have people ask some questions or other comments that might be relevant.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khan. A couple questions have come in various different forums. One is, should we be taking the temperature of our employees before they come into work each day?
It's a great question. I do believe there's a couple things that need to be put in place around returning employees. Number one, first, a policy. If you're sick, don't come to work. I think that's the first thing. Don't even show up, right? Certainly, a temperature or a symptom screen can be very helpful. There are some who feel that the symptom screen might be more broad. Typically, if a person does have a temperature over 100.4, they're going to feel it, but another assured way might be to have them do the symptom check as well as a temperature. There has been some discussions, I've seen this publications and other reports around, how reliable some of these temperature devices are. I think I've seen that it depends on where you put it on the face. Between the eyes apparently as the most reliable in terms of the temperature. But I do think it makes sense for people to know, stay home if you're sick. If you come to work, you have a symptom check, and those who are ill, if they're already at work, go home.
Yeah, and I know a lot of our customers and businesses across the state and across the country have been particularly curious about liability issues about returning to work, and so are trying in earnest to navigate what are the best practices and procedures to ensure they're doing everything they possibly can to make sure they're controlling for the virus as much as possible. One question that came in through the Q&A I want to double click on relates to immunity. And while we do that, if you wouldn't mind, everyone, quick kind of poll here. Have you already made plans to adapt your business to adjust to the pandemic? We really like to get a sense of where people are in that process as we start to shift the conversation over to Kelly Okalita in a few minutes. Give us a sense of where you're at on that spectrum. But there's a question around immunity, Dr. Khan. That some folks who've gotten COVID-19, and there's been a lot of information in the press, some factual, some not factual, around immunity and what we do and don't know. And there's a lot we still don't know, I think, around immunity. But what about folks that have had COVID-19 and have recovered to this point? And what do we know about immunity and antibodies? Because there's also been a lot of confluence of information in the communities around antibody testing, whether you are immune or not immune, if you've had or you've not had it. Can you help kind of clarify that for folks? And that's a complicated question and topic that probably takes longer than the 30 seconds to a minute we have for our time today. But I think it is on people's minds, and it's important to folks to try to understand and wade through that.
Thanks, John. And just briefly, I really appreciate the questions about immunity. Just to restate, this was a novel coronavirus, meaning none of us, meaning as people, humans, have ever been infected with this virus. So we had no historical memory in our immunity to recognize this particular novel coronavirus as we know SARS-CoV-2. Now, there is a family of coronaviruses, a subset of which cause the common cold. And so we've, of course, seen those, but this is a unique coronavirus that, of course, as we know, can cause severe illness and death in some individuals. What we know is that there's a viral phase, there's a respiratory phase, and there's an inflammatory response to this virus, a third phase. For people who have become infected, we know that there's a period of time where we develop antibodies. What we yet don't know is how long those antibodies might confer immunity to this novel virus should we become reinfected with it. And I think that's an important piece. What we know about the common cold coronavirus is that a person may have immunity for maybe 8-10 months, but certainly year over year, they could potentially get reinfected. In this particular case, we believe that persons who can mount sufficient antibody response, and it does seem to map to how severe their illness is, how robust their antibody response might be, that they may be protected for a bit longer, but we sure don't know about that. It is a area of research right now. It also maps to the work that's being done on a vaccine development to see that what kind of vaccine might be effective, because we want to make sure that antibodies are developed and that they be long lasting and neutralizing should we get exposed to this virus in the future. And I know that was a short response and there's probably a few more questions that relate to it, but we will follow up with this Q&A after our presentation and distribute some additional answers to these questions.
Thank you for that, Dr. Khan. And I have learned enough to know that the virus itself can adapt and does adapt and change over time. And so to your point, we know a little bit, we don't know everything. And as we continue to learn more, and even as the virus adapts, we have to be careful not to make snap decisions based on the little bits of data that we have to this point.
John, may I just make one comment, because
Sure.
I want to make sure that the audience is aware that if you do have someone who comes down ill and is infected, they should be home isolating, and those who have been in contact with that infected person should be put in quarantine, monitoring for symptoms, and get tested should they become ill. But it's very important to remove that infected person from that work environment.
Absolutely. Thanks for that call out, Dr. Khan, and clarity. Interesting quick poll result quick. Have you already made plans to adapt your business to adjust? 82% of you said yes. 10% are in the camp of really wanting to, but trying to figure out where to start. Some folks not yet, but we are planning to do it, and a smaller number, 3%, saying no. But the vast majority of folks saying absolutely, we are adjusting. In fact, you know, one of the things as we pivot over to Kelly Okolita on disaster preparedness is, you know, whether you know or don't know or have opinions or not opinions about COVID-19 and how the states and communities have adapted to this new environment, whether you do or don't like to wear a mask or so forth, the reality is that our economy needs to get back to work. And the faster we can keep people safe and healthy, the faster we can get businesses back up and operating. It might look different, it might feel a little different, but the economy will really take off when we can control and better understand how the virus is evolving and trying to keep those numbers down. So regardless of our opinions on the health side of this, there's an economic argument to this. And part of that pivots over to Kelly Okolita in disaster planning and preparedness. Any of our organizations or businesses need to thrive in the environment, no matter what the context is or situation. And Kelly brings over 25 years of industry expertise in this space. She is sought after as an expert on the topic. She's sought out internationally, I should say, as well, both a speaker and a subject matter expert. Kelly is joining us from Florida, which is where she takes up shop for a whole range of reasons. And disaster preparedness is, in fact, It hits, there she is, Kelly. I was hoping you'd come on there. Disaster preparedness, we were joking before the call. She's quite familiar with it, being a Florida resident and the hurricane season. But beyond that, she brings Hurricane Katrina experience in 9/11 as part of her resume of lifelong service in this space. And Kelly, I'd like to turn it over to you and talk to the group today a little bit about how you think about disaster preparedness, continuity planning so that the businesses can continue to run and be economically sustainable, despite whatever issue they might be facing. In this case, a pandemic, but it can take other forms as well. So Kelly, I'll let you take it away.
All right, Tron, thank you very much. And I apologize, I've been kind of in and out of this meeting as we're having kind of this serious thunderstorm going on here in Florida right now, but hopefully we'll stay up and keep us talking here. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you implement a culture of preparedness in your organization. We really want to talk not just about your organization, but the people that work for you as well. I will tell you that what we learned very clearly from 9/11 and Katrina and other events, and including this pandemic, is disasters are people events. They're human events. And we need to not only take care of our business, but we need to take care of our humans. Otherwise, they won't be there to take care of our business. So let's first talk about the business side. So let's talk about readying your business. Basically, regardless of the size of your business, you should plan for four major types of risks. The first is a disruption of IT services. So if you're that little hair salon that we just talked about a few minutes ago, you may not have a great big data center with lots of technology in it, but you probably have a computer that keeps track of your inventory, maybe your sales, your receipts, your taxes, etc. We want to make sure that if something happens to that physical facility where that PC lives, that you are able to recover that information because you've backed it up somewhere else, either backed it up onto a device that you can take home with you, or backed it up into the cloud so that you can recover it should you need to. Obviously, the more sophisticated your IT environment, the more detailed planning you need to have. But everybody, even little companies, need to talk about the technology that runs their business. And the second is a workplace disruption. And by workplace, I mean the place where you normally do your business. So your building or the area surrounding your building that doesn't allow you to work in your business building as you normally would. So you could talk about a fire or a flood or some type of I had a building that went out for almost a week from a water main break where the building was just fine, but there was no running water in the building. And we really don't want to be in a building with 1,600 people and no running water. So lots of things can affect your ability to work in your building at all. And so we want to talk about what we do if our building is unavailable. The next type of planning is around a workforce disruption, which is what we're really dealing with right now. A pandemic is a disruption to your workforce where it's not your building that's a problem or your technology that's an issue. It's really about the people that they're at risk from this terrible pandemic that we have going on right now. And so it's disrupting the ability of your workforce to work in its normal way, if at all. And so it's talking about workforce disruptions, and they can be pandemics, they could be strikes, they could be civil disorder. All kinds of things can cause a workforce disruption. And then finally, a supplier disruption. What if the things that you get from other people that help you run your business for some reason aren't available? So the supplier that gives you the shampoo or trimming tools and et cetera that you use to run your hair salon, that person goes out of business or is unable to supply you for a period of time. What does that mean to your business and your ability to continue operations? And so that's what we're really talking about, is thinking about the kind of risks that could cause a disruption to your ability to work in your normal way, and then how you would deal with that disruption, and building a plan around what your response would be. All of our plans at Cambia are built on the same premise. What's in each plan is the first thing you need to do when you've got something that either already has or has the potential to disrupt your business, is to gather those key decision makers, gather the people that are going to help you assess what's going on, and make decisions about how to respond to it. So you're going to first gather those key decision makers. Once you've got that, and you can gather them physically in a location, or you can gather them virtually, just like we are right now on a conference call. And then once you've got those key people on a call, you want to assess what's going on. What do we think this is? How long do we think it's going to last? What are our alternatives about how we respond to it? What do we all think we should do? And then we as a team would make a decision about how we're going to respond to what's going on. And then we start to mobilize people that work for us or the people even on that team to start acting on those decisions that we made. And then finally, we have to communicate. We have to communicate to our stakeholders. And stakeholders are both internal, like our employees, but also external for the people that are our customers or people that are vendors or any other external stakeholders that support us. We want to make sure that we have a communication strategy that lets everybody know what's going on. I will tell you that I've been doing this business continuity, disaster recovery, incident management stuff for a really long time. And I will tell you the way that people perceive an event has absolutely nothing to do with how long it lasted or how many times we made a bad decision and had to backtrack and start all over again before we actually got it right. The way that people perceive an event. Can everybody not hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Kelly, we can hear you. Please go ahead and
Okay,
continue.
I apologize. Sean said he could not. All right, the way people perceive an event has to do with how well they're communicated to so that they can manage their own space. So if they understand what that means to them and what they're expected to do. And some events like weather events are very short-lived, and we have this one communication, and we have this one gather, assess, decide, mobilize, and communicate, and that's the end of the story. Other events like this one that we're all experiencing right now is something that's going to go on for a period of time. So we're going to repeat this process as we learn new things, as we have new decisions that have to be made. We're going to continue to gather the key decision makers, assess the new information we have available, decide what we're going to do, mobilize again, and then communicate. Again, communications to your stakeholders is one of the most important pieces to build into each of your plans. If we go to the next slide, we want to talk about making your workforce more ready to respond, to be resilient themselves. Cambia takes the resiliency not just of our business, but of our employees very, very seriously. And we support our employees being ready at home, because we know if they're not ready at home, they're not going to be able to come to work as quickly as they could if they were ready. So we actually pay for our employees to take Red Cross training in basic first aid, CPR, and AED use. We actually make it a part of our wellness scorecard where we give them credit towards their health insurance premium if they take that training. If they have a 72-hour kit at home for each member of their household, and that 72-hour kit includes not just food and water, but things like medicines and first aid kits and et cetera that are going to help them survive as a family during that period of time. We also give them credit if they have a family emergency plan. And we support the continuation of people understanding what they need to do through annual preparedness fairs at each of our sites. We do safety drills, we do earthquake exercises, we do evacuation drills, we do a lot of team exercises, tabletops, walking through different types of scenarios. And we have a series of safety minute videos that talks about, and they're literally a minute long, that talk about what do you do, what are the correct protective actions to take if you're in an earthquake or if you are caught in a flash flood, etc. So we really want to reinforce employees to be resilient themselves in order to help us as an organization to be more resilient. Amy, do you have anything to add to that family emergency kit plan or 72-hour kit that you would recommend as well?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to really, again, think about our home setting, our household, our family members, and determine who's at higher risk, right? Is grandma staying with us? Do we have a son or daughter who's got asthma? Making sure that One, we've got an ample supply of medications available to treat those chronic conditions. We have maybe established a relationship with the pediatrician or the geriatrician that can include a telehealth relationship. About 90% of our providers now do telehealth visits, so that if we can anticipate any health concerns, that we would already have a way to be in touch with that doctor or that clinician. And then also just being sure that everyone within the home, is aware. For example, if I'm a nurse and I have been working on the intensive care unit, coming home, I could potentially be infecting my family. So there's some home concerns that we might want to think about. And in some healthcare settings, they've actually set up places for their healthcare personnel to stay, because the risk for that member to go home might be great in terms of bringing the illness home to the family.
Thanks, Amy. That's terrific. All right, let's move on. So we're going to take a break here and let you folks ask questions from myself or Amy about anything related to preparedness.
Thank you, Kelly. Sean is having some audio issues, so I'm going to go ahead and serve as the moderator of the moment. Kelly, our first question that came in is, what if an employee doesn't feel comfortable returning to work? If the business has done all of the work that it can to make the environment as safe as possible, and it is ready to return to on-site operations, or frankly has already been doing so because it was one of the businesses that never needed to close, what approach should they take? I mean, in addition to doing disaster management services, you're also part of the HR function. And so we have a question about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, disasters are human events. This pandemic is a human event. And so you're going to have, and different people react to threats to their personal life in different ways. And regardless of how safe you may think the environment has become for bringing your employees back, you will have some people that are just not comfortable. And so I encourage you to be as adaptable as possible with them and flexible as possible with them. That's what we're doing with our employees. We are almost 100% at home right now, but we do have some employees that do have to come into the office every day. People that do screen our mail and et cetera. But there are employees who are very concerned about the potential of coming back into the office, either because they themselves have underlying health conditions, or someone in their family does, or they have young children at home, or they're pregnant. We are trying, and I encourage you as best you can as a business to support and be as flexible as possible with those employees, and make it possible for them to work from home and continue to do so as long as you can, as long as it makes sense for your business.
Great, thank you. And Amy, do you have anything to add to that from a clinical perspective?
Yeah. I think that there are opportunities, especially for those most vulnerable, to explore perhaps changes in job duties. Maybe there's a kind of a morph and maybe adopting some other work-related steps that need to be done so that that individual can safely work from home or work distantly, or in some cases maybe come in earlier in the day before there's a whole bunch of employees there all at one time, or maybe working with the public, or stay later to complete their work. So it's a really important opportunity to kind of understand what other options might be available for that individual, whether it be virtual care, new job duties, or kind of shifting their time or hours of duty so that they're not exposed during that peak time where there's others in the office or in the business setting.
Hey, Kelly and Dr. Khan and Terne, I'm back. And Kelly, I just demonstrated your first primary bucket of concern around continuity planning, which was IT infrastructure, and lost connection with you. But I'm back, and I'm calling in from my phone, which is the beauty of the world we live in now, is that I'm off the computer, which doesn't appear to be working, and joining by phone. So apologies to the audience for a little bit of a shaky shaky video, but not bad overall. Hey, Dr. Khan, I'm wondering if we could have going into the fall and schools reopening and managing that uncertainty. One of the biggest solvers of all this becomes if and when we're able to develop a vaccine. Could you comment for just a moment on where we're at in that process?
Sure can, Sean, and I think you might have, I didn't hear all of the question, but I think the question relates to where are we at in terms of vaccine that would be effective in treating COVID or preventing
Yes,
it.
Dr. Khan, thank you.
Okay, that's good. Yes, this process has been really fascinating because it's unprecedented. In the normal vaccine development world, we have usually a multi-year horizon in the development of vaccine. And in part, some of that is because not only do we need to assure that we've got the right what we call vehicle or platform for the vaccine, but that we've assured it's safe for the population. We have an unprecedented level of collaboration happening around the globe today, in part between a public and private partnership, the National Institutes in Health, along with all of our vaccine developers and manufacturers, both domestically and globally, are working together and really accelerating the development of a number of vaccine candidates. There are now over 150 vaccine candidates that have been identified. I'd say more like a dozen or less that are in those phased clinical trials to bring one of them, hopefully, to fruition as soon as possible. There are about 3 or 4 agents now that will be entering into the phase 3 clinical trials, which is to not only assure that it's effective, but that it's safe, meaning that tens of thousands of people would be given this vaccine to see if it's effective in mounting an antibody response that is neutralizing to prevent an infection. Keep in mind, and this is historical, that only 1 out of 10 vaccine candidates ever really get to being to market, and that each one of those vaccines until that point takes about $1 billion historically to be developed. So this is an area that we have recognized that puts us at some vulnerability. Our government has embarked on an Operation Warp Speed approach to work with our manufacturers to develop the reagents and the substrates and the adjuvants for the vaccine so that when we get the candidates that it can be mass produced. And production itself is tricky. It involves many steps and has a precise sort of recipe, if you will, that needs to be followed so that there is pure vaccine produced without any kind of contamination. So it's going to be quite a heroic effort for us not only to be able to immunize our whole country, but really the entire globe.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khan. And if you missed the first part of the tee-up, it was really around trying to reflect and recognize many of the plans that these businesses, our customers, ourselves included, need to make, both as families with kids going back in the fall or not, and how this fall unfolds as it relates to COVID-19 and the various restrictions and or openings that we may have at any given time. Really trying to turn into Kelly's last part of her presentation, Kelly, on using our own organization as a bit of a guinea pig, if you will, to demonstrate what we've done and how we've done it. I will say to the audience, one of the wonderful things about this experience for our organization has been, and quite frankly, very proud of this, we moved to 100% remote work really with the flip of a switch. And we had 100% of our workforce working remotely within a period of just a few days. And the business really never missed a beat. Customer service, data, claims payment, administration, and that didn't come easy. Now, not every organization is as maybe large as ours, but I think there's a lot of best practices to glean from that Kelly, I'd love for you to double click on here with the few minutes that we have remaining at the bottom of this hour.
Thanks, Sean. So just a quick overview of how we plan and respond across Cambia. I'm going to talk about 4 primary teams that we deploy and meet with and train across the organization. The first one is our life safety team. So basically we train them in that basic first aid, CPR and AED use. We train them to safely evacuate people or shelter them in place. Accounting for employees after a disastrous event. So basically we have a plan for them, an occupant emergency plan that talks about the protective actions we take to keep employees safe in our workspace. So that's our team that deals with the life safety. And anytime we have an event happening in a building that has any type of life safety impact, they're the first of our teams that gets activated. The next teams we'll talk about is throughout our organization, throughout our business lines, and within our technology environment, we have teams, planners that have been assigned by the business line or by the technology group to build the plans around that particular business line. So our business continuity planners build plans that talk about how we're going to manage our business impact, how we're going to manage the workload, manage and communicate to the staff that we have, document any recovery procedures we have, and make sure that no matter what happens, that we have the ability to continue to take care of our customers, our members, our providers, etc., and that we keep those day-to-day operations running. Our disaster recovery teams are responsible for the same thing, only they do it around the technology that supports our business. So we have a team of people that is responsible for recovering the technology in each one of our buildings. Whether there's a data center there or not, there's always at least some level of technology in every building we do business in. So whether it's just some local servers for print and file, or we have desktop environments, or etc., we want to make sure that we have the ability, we have a documented plan about how we're going to bring that all back. And then moving to the next team to the left, the local incident response team. In every site, I have 3 whole people that work for me, and we have 9 major sites across our footprint. And the chance that I will actually be physically present in a site when something bad happens there is very slim to none. And so it's important that we have trained teams that are physically located in each site that are responsible for the tactical decision making about how we respond to an event that happens in that site. So it can be something as simple as weather that's coming and whether or not we're going to keep the office open, or whether we're going to close early or not open for the day, etc., to longer term events like how we moved people from a site to home in the middle of a pandemic. So the local incident response team is that tactical boots on the ground, managing the site response, reacting to what's going on, and making sure that they take care of the people and the business that happens in that site. And then finally, we have a senior leadership team that is responsible for our strategic response. So they're the ones who don't get involved in that boots on the ground tactical response to what's happening, but are the ones who make the big decisions, make sure that they anticipate the impact of the decisions we might make around our response to this pandemic, how that impact might be to our members or to our employer groups. They make sure that our principles and values come through as we respond to and work through an issue that could be impacting either just our business or our business and the people that we support. And we also have some very specialty teams because, most of our events happen by site. Weather happens by site, flooding happens by site, earthquakes happen by site, but not every event is a site event. So we have a cybersecurity incident management team, we have an infectious disease team, we have a threat assessment team, and we have a data center team that are very specialty teams that specialize in that particular type of response that is more corporate wide versus just an individual site that's been impacted. So that's kind of a quick overview. All of these teams we meet with quarterly. We do tabletop exercises and sometimes more than tabletop exercises to make sure that they've got that muscle memory, that they know what they're supposed to do, and they know what's expected of them, what their role is in this response. So We started talking with our local incident response teams and our senior leadership team in January about this coming pandemic, and we've continued to work through them and through our planners as we've worked through the response to this event. If you move to the next slide, you know, one of the things that we need to talk about as a business is going back to the office. So planning for our return. We're not going back to the office anytime soon, but some of the things that we're taking into consideration are schools and daycares open. Have we developed protocols for just responding to people who are become ill in the office? Do we have a communication plan for how we return that's for each stakeholder involved? Have we determined what policies we will have at work to keep people safe? You know, are we going to wear masks? Are we going to take temperatures, et cetera? Can our facilities support for social distancing? Have we identified the triggers for returning and for pulling back if we need to? Making sure our management teams and our employees are ready to return, making sure our spaces are safe and ready to receive our employees and our customers, and whether public transportation is safe and available. And with that, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to turn it back over to Sean to kind of close us up. Sean?
Kelly, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time today, and particularly your expertise over the last few months for our organization and sharing that with our customers and our partners throughout the state. I'll just wrap with a few minutes that we have left. Up on your screen here is a whole list of resources. I said at the beginning that we've made available to Regence members throughout this COVID pandemic. It has the most, we will continue to evolve it, quite frankly, as the situation warrants it. But I will say this, as simple as this sounds, we have invested significant resources into developing a 21st century app that allows our members to access the care that they need. And if your employees, particularly if you're a small business or large business for that matter, if your employees haven't downloaded the Regence app onto their phones, this is a great opportunity to try to drive that utilization, because that resource alone is probably the best central place to access the resources we're making available in real time and provide information and up-to-date information related to COVID-19 testing, treatment policies, medication refills, to access the behavioral health resources we've talked about, like My Strength and or the Empower platform. These are tools that we've made available, and I would encourage you and your organizations to ensure you're fully utilizing that resource, particularly as your workforces are either remote or on-site or returning to work in some form and stage. The last thing I'll leave you with is a spirit of how we're working with you. I want you to know at our organization, we really do believe that we're more than a health insurer. We have to do that exceptionally well to earn your business and your loyalty. But I want you to know this team here thinks every day about how do we become an integrated part of your organization to ensure that you are successful. When you are successful as businesses, it helps our state, it helps our community, and helps us. So we're far more than focusing our time and energy on just being a very great claims adjudicator. Quite frankly, we're working on being a full solutions partner for you and developing content that helps you be successful businesses. That is our commitment of service to you and throughout our entire organization. We really, really appreciate how we have worked together throughout this, particularly this last quarter, and I expect the next quarter together as we navigate this. And I just really appreciate how we've stuck together as a state and as a community throughout this. We really want your feedback. This is our 5th webinar in this series. We really would like to get your thoughts on topics you'd like to see covered. We have an incredible array of experts and information that we could make available to you. And I don't want to guess as to what's important to you. I really want us to deliver up content that helps you be a successful business in this environment. So please let us know. Thank you for joining us today. Be well and stay healthy. Take care, everybody.